Save it for the stream.
All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are here with some more MMA DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel. This time for UFC Vegas 82. Brendan Allen, Paul Craig. This is a live Q&A breaking down the fights, talking about the newcomers, the main event, everybody on the card. Welcome. I am Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. Single game. Well, I've been doing so many football videos. I was trying to get out the $1 million winner right off the bat, Jake. So I apologize for that. But I'm joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMA DFS.com. And Jake, it's been back-to-back weeks with fights, 12 fights or more on a card. It seems like forever since we have seen each other in back-to-back weeks. Welcome, man. What's up?
What's going on, man? Yeah, it's been a minute. I was just telling you, like, I was trying to figure out when the last 14 fight card was, and I was scrolling up my list. It was in April. It's been 7 months since we had exactly 14 fights on a card. Pretty crazy.
That is nuts. That is nuts. So, for those of you that are new here, welcome. This is a live stream. If you're watching this on replay, no big deal. We'll cover everything you need, more than likely. And you have questions after this goes live and after it's replayed, hit up our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/Discord, to ask us more questions. See Qualkai's in the chat. What's up? Again, this is live. If you have questions, throw them in the chat now. We'll be here 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how many questions we get. I know we're doing this at 10 p.m. Eastern on Friday night, pretty abnormal time for a live stream. But the fight started at 2 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, so we figured we'd get this out of the way, get you as much time as you can to digest it, and make profitable lineups for Saturday. So what we're going to do, we're going to break down the main event, Brendan Allen, Paul Craig, what it means for betting and DFS. For newcomers who have never set foot inside the octagon, have no fight logs to speak of, we will break down their fighting style, their background, what we can expect from them in their first walk to the octagon tomorrow on Saturday. We'll play good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup for those fighters that have less than 4 UFC fights under their belt on their resume to give some context to their stats and their fight logs. We'll give you a favorite prize picks play. Jake has been crushing the prize picks plays as of late. A fight that you have to target in DFS. We'll give you our stream parlay, 2 different props and or money lines that we like that we're going to parlay together. And a lot of great analysis along the way. And Jake has some extra hot takes this week, so make sure you stick around for those. So, Jake, let's start with our typical breakdown here. Brendan Allen, Paul Craig. I don't know if interesting is the right word for this matchup, but it is indeed a matchup. So talk to me about how you expect this fight to play out, and then most importantly, what does it mean for betting in DFS?
I mean, it's sort of interesting just because both guys come from grappling backgrounds, so you never know how that's going to play out, if it's going to turn into a striking battle or if they're going to test each other on the mat. It's sort of interesting. I mean, they're both lower volume, so for a main event, maybe it's less interesting because we're very unlikely going to get, one of these high volume striking battles. The ideal main event, I feel like, is just like a crazy war for 5 rounds with 200 significant strikes. It's definitely not that type of fight. It's probably not the type of fight that even needs the extra rounds. If you look at the odds of it going the distance are plus 450. So 17% chance, not very likely, probably going to end early. Paul Craig has been prone to getting knocked out throughout his career. He's been kind of a submission or bust guy. But on one side, we have Brendan Allen, 27 years old. He's won 5 straight since he got knocked out by Chris Curtis in 2021. His only other UFC loss was to Curtis's teammate Sean Strickland, also knocked him out in the second round. So kind of funny, those are his 2 losses. They just beating up on him over at Extreme Couture in Vegas. But this will be Allen's first UFC main event. He did have 5 main events before joining the UFC. Went 3-2 with 2 mid-round finishes, 3 decisions. I had 5-round decision losses to Anthony Hernandez and Eric Anders. I mean, not the worst losses, especially Anthony Hernandez. I mean, you could argue that Eric Anders was, but I mean, going 5 rounds with Anthony Hernandez shows that he's got 5-round cardio theoretically, if somehow this needed to go 5 rounds, which is unlikely. BJJ black belt, pretty good striker. Almost knocked out Bruno Silva in his last fight before submitting him. So it just shows that he's got pretty good power. And he's still developing, still a young guy. He's at Killcliff FC, so he's got a good team around him. I've always given Brendan Allen kind of a hard time because he's been such a good grappler and refuses to use it a lot of the time. But it seems like he is kind of getting a little bit smarter. I mean, maybe the coaching's getting to him. He's talked about in interviews how he's had mental hurdles to overcome, and he's in a better spot now, so he's fighting smarter and he has more energy, like just mentally on fight night to make better decisions. So I think he is using his grappling a little bit more effectively recently and not necessarily just playing into the strong point of opponents, but he still does that. And I think he'll still probably do it here. He's kind of like stubborn where he'll probably test Paul Craig on the mat, even though he could. I would say he could probably easily outstrike Paul Craig on the feet. Brendan Allen has shown better striking. I know Paul Craig has talked about improving his striking, but still he's a guard pulling jiu-jitsu guy that has been knocked out a bunch. He's submitted a bunch of guys. He's got a bunch of good wins on his record that aged quite well. You know, he broke Jamal Hill's arm. He had that last second comeback submission against Ankalaev. I mean, just a bunch of good wins for Paul Craig, who
Antigulov,
had been fighting.
my boy.
Yeah. The prestigious win over Antigulov, that guy never to be seen again. I mean, Paul Craig in general, you know, it's his second fight at 185. He was fighting at 205 for his entire career. 35 years old now, and he just cuts down 20 pounds, which was a concern in his last fight. He was fighting Andre Muniz, who not a very likely candidate to test the chin if it was a tough cut for Paul Craig. So I feel like the jury's still out if his durability got worse. But I mean, his durability was already bad, so maybe less of an issue for Paul Craig. Yeah, I mean, how much worse could it be? I mean, maybe just not taking the punches from 205ers is going to be the bigger help there than the hindrance of cutting more weight. And it seems like Paul Craig did it right. I mean, it sort of seemed like he wasn't really cutting weight at 205, and then he's like, oh, I should cut weight. You know, I'm 35 years old. If I want to compete, I need to be cutting weight like the rest of these guys. And he looks pretty jacked now. So he seems like he's in good shape. He always talks about, you know, the analytics, the numbers, like improving all of the data. He seems really into all of that and really into the whole weight cutting process. I do think he's doing it right. So less of a concern about durability and cardio. But this is the first 5-round fight, not just the first main event, first 5-round fight of Paul Craig's career. So we have no idea what his cardio would look like if it did get into the championship rounds. So advantage for Brendan Allen there. But yeah, I mean, Paul Craig, ultimately submission guy, works really well off his back. Probably going to try to get the fight to the ground by any means that he can. Obviously, Brendan Allen is also a good grappler. So, I mean, that would be interesting. I don't really see Paul Craig outlanding Brendan Allen. You know, I don't think it's going to come down to a decision, but I don't really see him catching Brendan Allen, who's been knocked out twice in the UFC. So kind of like can Paul Craig land a Hail Mary submission? We've seen him do it before, but it's going to be tough against a good grappler. So really tough spot for Paul Craig. I think Brendan Allen, you know, the most likely outcome is he knocks Paul Craig out at some point in the first few rounds. But maybe it's like a club and sub. He's done a bunch of those. Really good rear naked chokes. In terms of DFS, generally when Brendan Allen has gotten outside of the first round, he hasn't been putting up huge scores. So he's coming off a career best 118-point performance in a first round submission. He's never topped 102 points in a fight that's made it out of the first round. So if we get a mid-round finish at his high price tag, there's a good chance he gets left out. But, you know, if you get a multi-knockdown performance, something like that, some outlier performance, and that could easily score better. But historically, looking at his numbers, he hasn't been a guy that scores well with later round finishes. So, I mean, that kind of looks kind of fadeable. If he wins, and he's probably going to win. If Paul Craig wins, he's shown the ability to only score like 70 points in third round submissions. So it's not impossible, even at his dirt cheap price tag, if we get a high scoring slate, it's not impossible that Paul Craig gets the third round submission and still gets left out. But it is unlikely. He's so cheap. He would probably be a value play if he wins, but unlikely he's going to win. Just not, you know, what are the odds? 22% chance according to the odds that Paul Craig wins. I mean, maybe that's fair on a Hail Mary submission. But I could definitely see it getting left out of tournaments, whoever wins, but more likely Brendan Allen wins, he gets left out. Possible he gets in there if it's a first round knockout. But I can definitely see it being a fadeable main event. And then you go to cash in low risk contests, and I don't think you need to stack it. You look at Paul Craig's losses, he's got a bunch of single digit scores in his losses. If you combine that with Brendan Allen only scoring like 100 points, not a very good fight to stack. So really not that interested in playing this fight in DFS, in low risk or in high risk contests.
Yeah, I think that's a great breakdown. And first of all, just the stretch we've been on the last 3 or so slates where we've had these outrageous odds for the main event to go the distance that we haven't even really been treating these 5 rounders as 5 rounders, right? This fight, Almeida versus Derek Lewis, both of the main events in the title fights last week with Aspinall and Pavlovich and Pereira and Yuri. So it's kind of interesting to play these slates when we're not even considering the championship rounds for DFS scoring. And to your point about Brendan Allen being left out, sure, if he gets a round 1 KO, he's obviously in contention there. But his price tag at $9,400, combined with the fact that we do indeed have 14 fights on the card, really does make it the prototypical fade main event spot in GPPs. Because you're going to have to take some stands somewhere if you're building 20 lineups, 3 lineups, 150 lineups. I see no better stance than to fade at least the Allen side. And to your point, if Craig wins, he's still probably in the optimal lineup. So I think it's a great breakdown there, Jake. And it seems like one of the easier ones. What do you have as for the total ownership on this fight and your projected ownership right now?
It's on the lower side. I think most people can kind of realize the same things we're seeing. So it's at just over 60% combined ownership, which is pretty low for a main event. So like that takes some of the shine off of fading it in tournaments, just the fact that a lot of people will fade it.
For sure. What about small field? Just for those who play those less than 500 players. I mean, generally we still look to play a main event fighter in those types of contests, just because we can almost guarantee 70, 80 point score from the winner, at least the bare minimum. Would you consider fading this fight in smaller contests too?
I mean, you can. I think I'd be more interested in playing Allen there. And I think most people would be. I mean, I don't think that's a hot take. He'll be more popular in small field because, if he gets outscored by someone by like 5 points and gets left out of the true optimal, he might still have a much higher chance of, scoring 100 points than some of these guys. So I think he still makes sense in small field. But yeah, I mean, if you want to get like leverage, then, he's going to be more popular in small field. So there's more leverage by fading him.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Again, if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat. I know not many are going to be watching this live on a late Friday night on the East Coast here. But if you have questions, throw them in. If not, we'll be in Discord all day tomorrow morning, Saturday, answering any questions that you do have. Let's talk about the newcomers on the card. We have 4 fighters officially making their UFC debut. We'll start from the first fight of the night until the last fight of the night. And technically, we were all geared up for this first guy to make his debut a few months ago. Botched his weight cut, thought it was happening again this week. Did indeed miss weight, but it's Rafael Estevam, who the model likes, Jake, and we were high on him originally. Never got a chance to talk about him on air because the weight cut botched last time out. But talk to me about Estevam. What type of fighting style does he have? What is his strength of schedule? Outlook in this fight against Charles Johnson?
Yeah, this is actually the third time he tried to make his debut. The first time he didn't even get to fight week because his opponent dropped out. The second time he dropped out due to a botched weight cut. This is the third time, and he missed weight by 2 pounds. So, I mean, this guy's really having a tough time getting his foot in the door for this debut, but still pretty young, 27 years old, undefeated, 11-0 with 7 finishes. He's at 125. I mean, the fact that he's only 27 and struggling to make weight makes me think at some point he's probably going to move up to 135. And if he misses again next fight, it's probably going to be sooner rather than later. But like you said, I mean, he looks good for DFS. Lots of takedowns, good wrestling, lots of top pressure, lots of ground and pounds. So, I mean, just like all sorts of DFS scoring potential. It's a pretty good matchup in Charles Johnson, who we've seen struggle a bunch in terms of grappling. So, I mean, it's hard not to like Esteban from all those reasons. But the fact that he missed weight by 2 pounds and looks pretty rough in the scales, that sucks. Like, we've been wanting to play this guy for like all year. Now he finally shows up for his debut, and he looks pretty bad on the scales. And he misses weight. So it makes it a little bit trickier to know what to do with him. But good stylistic matchup. The guy wrestles. He's going against a striker who has struggled to defend wrestling. So as long as the weight miss doesn't kill him, then I think it's a pretty interesting play in DFS. But he's also been very inactive for the last couple of years. It's been like a year since his Contender Series fight. It's been like 2 years since the second most recent fight. So inactivity is definitely a concern in addition to the weight miss.
For sure. And for those of you who want some extra entertainment between now and the time the slate starts, go ahead and watch his Contender Series fight. It would be the equivalent if you or I or Jake were in the opponent's corner and how they were imploring their fighter to get out of a terrible position, and begging him to do better. It is an exciting and entertaining corner watch for sure. And it'll give you a nice glimpse into Esteban's style if you got some time over the next, I don't know, 12, 14 hours here. So, all right, Jake, moving on. Moving on up, we have Cal Machado, heavyweight from Brazil/Canada. Talk to me about Cal Machado, fighting style, strength of schedule.
Yeah, he's young for a heavyweight, 29 years old, only 10 pro fights, 8-1-1 with 6 finishes. He's coming off a decision win on Contender Series against an opponent that like straight up didn't want to fight. The dude was just like there to push him against the cage, and then in space didn't want any part of a striking battle. So like he put up strikes in that fight, but it was also a terrible fight. And before that, he had been on the Canadian regional scene, just beating up all sorts of senior citizens. You look at the guys he's been fighting. So before going on Contender Series, he fought a 44-year-old 11-7 fighter, and before that, he fought a 54-year-old 11-15 fighter who he actually beat twice, like over his last like 4 fights. So like apparently not much competition on the heavyweight Canadian regional scene if these are the guys he's fighting. I mean, I have never seen a 54-year-old guy.
Dude was jacked, by
the guy was pretty jacked. He was jacked for 54. Like he was in really good shape, but I mean, I don't even know how that.
He got freight trained, predictably, the old man.
Yeah, I don't even know how that gets sanctioned. Like, I would be if I'm the promotion, I'm like worried about that guy dying in the octagon. Right. But back to Machado, he's a black belt, which like we see some of these heavyweights be black belts, like Jared Bandera, and then never use it or be terrible. This guy has gotten a couple armbar submissions recently. So I mean, again, against terrible opponents, but he will at least use his jiu-jitsu on the mat at times when fights get there. But overall, not that impressed by him. Like, not that great a wrestler, sloppy striker. He's tall at 6'4", but he kind of lacks muscle. He's been weighing in. Not that long ago, he was weighing in like 230. He put on some weight now, but it didn't really seem like he put on muscle. He just kind of like put on some fat on the midsection. So he's weighing like 250, but he's got like a 230 frame, where he probably could cut down to light heavyweight if he really wanted to. I mean, it'd probably be a tough cut. Or he could like really bulk up and be a heavyweight, but he hasn't really done either. So he's kind of a tweener. Just not that impressive anywhere. But sort of well-rounded. We'll see, man. Really low level of competition though. So he could definitely get freight trained in the UFC.
For sure. All right, moving on. We have, here he is, Mick Tibek Orolbai, making his debut on short notice against Uros Medic. And I got to say, Jake, when I saw his picture come up on the Twitter announcement that he was stepping into this fight, I said, who is this mysterious 45-year-old man with the 2 championship belts from Party City? But I was more impressed upon looking into him. What is your take on Orolbai, his strength of schedule, his fighting style, and his chances here in the rare short notice debut favorited spot?
Yeah, I mean, even more rare, the short notice favorite debuter. Like we've seen short notice favorites, but I mean, pretty rare when they're debuting against guys with experience. Yeah, this guy, like you say, is allegedly 25 years old. I don't know about that, but whatever. He's 11-1-1 with 10 finishes. Like you say, he stepped in on Tuesday after Johnny Parsons dropped out, so literally only had a few days to get ready for this fight. He also just competed 3 weeks ago, so he's cutting weight twice in like a month. But the thing about that is it looked like he'd been working his way down to 155 pounds. He was weighing in for these 170-pound fights, like three or 4 pounds under the limit. So that's probably actually a benefit for him because he's making his debut at 170, and he probably didn't have to cut that much weight given what he was doing. He's coming off this violent knockout of this like Bob Ross stunt double that thought he was Ryan Hall, just rolling around the mat. I mean, this guy. I mean, the guy might be dead. I don't know. It was bad. But generally, Orolbai has looked more like a wrestler. You go back to like his first LFA fight, like 3 fights ago, and he landed like just like 10 takedowns or something, just dominated the whole fight on the mat, won a decision, and then someone must have said like, "Hey, you're not going to get to the UFC being that boring." So he's like, "All right, I'm not going to wrestle that much. I'm going to come back. I'm going to strike." And then he started landing knockouts. He's shown decent power. But he's pretty well-rounded. He's got striking. He's got good wrestling. You don't really know what his approach is going to be just because he's one of these guys that can wrestle, but then chooses not to at times. So that can definitely definitely be frustrating in the UFC, especially going against the one-dimensional striker here. Like, you would hope he would wrestle. But he did take it on short notice, so you never know what his cardio is going to be like. Is he going to have 15 minutes of wrestling in him, or is he going to try to preserve his cardio a little bit? I would hope that he would come in and wrestle. That team alpha male, he's got a good team around him. They should be telling him, like, hey, you're going against a one-dimensional striker. All you have to do is wrestle, and you can win, even though you took the fight on 4 days' notice. But we'll see what he does. I'm pretty interested to see what his approach will be. There's a very easy path to victory, and there's a hard path to victory, and we'll see what he chooses.
Always the funnest game to play. Which path of victory will the fighter that we play take? And it's never fun when we don't see him wrestle in the first 4 minutes. So we'll see how this goes. And finally, we have Peyton Talbot, the most expensive fighter on the card at $9,500, making his debut against Nick Aguirre. Background, strength of schedule, fighting style. Talk to me about Peyton Talbot.
Yeah, man, this is a 25-year-old kid. 25-year-old kid. Sorry, they're both 25. It threw me off for a second, but
I don't
he's only 6
just real quick, just put them side by side, and how are these two guys both the same age?
Dude, I was reading my notes. And I was like, wait, that can't be right. They both can't be 25. I was like, one guy's 50 and has been like smoking cigarettes his whole life. The other guy's like 18. But yeah, they're somehow these two are the same age. I need a side by side, and no one would ever buy that. Talbot, the much younger 25-year-old of these newcomers, he only has 6 pro fights. He's coming off a Contender Series win in August. Before that, he had 5 late round knockouts. He'd been fighting on the California regional scene with just like random promotions, like the Uriah Faber A1 Combat startup promotion. I'm pretty sure that's pretty new. And before that, it was some completely random promotion. So he hasn't been in like any major organizations. He just graduated college. He's training at this tiny gym in Reno where it like doubles as like a gun range. I think their claim to fame was that Paige Van Zant trained there for a short period of time once.
Cool.
Right. Awesome. Like, if that's what you're putting up on your website, like, she used to be here. Yeah. She's not even a fighter anymore. So he doesn't really have any high level training partners. He doesn't really have any high level coaches. He just graduated college. It seems sort of like wishy-washy on what he wants to do. He's like, yeah, I'll be in the UFC for the next 2 years, I think is what he said. It's like, all right, so you're already planning on your next step after that. And it's also, I was looking at his Instagram. So we had the Contender Series fight, and it was like August 8th, I think. And then he got the news here that he would be competing in his debut on August 22nd. That was announced. Like a week and a half later, he went to Burning Man. So I mean, I don't think he's really that focused on improving because he's a good striker, but he's got no defensive wrestling. He's got no defensive striking. Like, he should be looking for a new team to train with, where actual training partners that can show him how to fight. But instead, he's just kind of like doing his thing. I mean, it seems like he's having a good time in life. Like, I can't blame him. He's in his early 20s, but at the same time, he doesn't really seem to be taking the UFC gig that seriously. And for a guy that has good striking but doesn't have anything else, you would think that when he had 13 weeks for a training camp, he'd be looking at improving his skill set and be like, all right, like, I'm in the UFC now. Like, people are going to take me down. Like, they're going to punch me in the face harder than I can just take. Because right now his striking defense is, I can just absorb the damage. Like, that's his striking defense. He just takes all the shots. And it seems like he's used to, like, basically sparring with 16-ounce gloves where he's like, oh, yeah, they're not going to hurt me that bad. So he just, like, takes the shots, hands down, chin-up approach. Like, no real takedown defense. He wrestled in high school, but pure striker. He's just trying to land as much volume as possible. He set the record on Contender Series, I believe is what they were saying, like the bantamweight record. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not that impressed by this guy. People are comparing him to Sean O'Malley. Like, Sean O'Malley at least had some decent grappling and was actually a good striker and doesn't get punched in the face constantly. Like, I feel like this guy, he seems potentially fraudulent to me, but he does land a bunch of volume, and he's shown that he's been durable, like, at least against low-level opponents. But seems like he's got fraud written all over him, man. The fact that he's the biggest favorite on the card is pretty crazy, and the most expensive fighter. But, I mean, he definitely, in the DFS perspective, has the potential to score a bunch of points if his opponent just lets him, like, sit there and strike. But I think he's going to run into issues when he faces grapplers or people with power that can, they can hit him harder than he can take. So I think he's in for some rough roads ahead.
Interesting take for the most expensive fighter and one of the biggest favorites on the card. So for those of you tuning in watching this video, this is quite the take to have for someone of this standing in the betting markets and in the DraftKings salary board. So just take note. All right, Jake, let's play good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. Fighters with less than 4 fights under their resume in the UFC. And again, we will start from the bottom, the first fight of the night until the last fight of the night. We have 2 fighters with 3 fights in the UFC: Trey Ogden, Nicholas Mota. Are they good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup for either?
Yes, I think Moda is pretty bad. He's got decent boxing. He's bad at everything else. He's not very durable. And Trey Ogden's kind of the opposite. He's more well-rounded. He has been very durable. He's been prone to getting submitted, but Moda doesn't really. He's not much of a submission guy. He's just a pure boxer. So I would say from Moda's perspective, it's a bad fighter and a bad matchup. And from Ogden's perspective, I mean, he's looked bad so far in the UFC. He's been like a point fighting kickboxer, but he looked good on the regional scene in terms of his grappling. He was like part of Glory MMA. He was their jiu-jitsu coach. So like he had that whole transition. They started his own gym, and it almost seems like after he started his own gym, he's like, all right, I got to play it safe. Like I can't look foolish. Like everyone's watching. Like I need business. If I just get knocked out or submitted, like it's going to cost me here and in my gym. I don't know, man. He's been playing it safe. But if you listen to him, all of his interviews, he's like, look, this could be my last shot. Like, I'm going to revert back to the regional scene stuff I was doing. I'm going to get aggressive. I'm going to finish Nicholas Mota. And, like, if this is my last fight, then I'm going to let people know who I am. And hopefully I have 10 more fights. But for all I know, I only have one more. So it seems like he's going to lay it all out there. At least he's saying that. I mean, he could still shit the bed. But it seems like he's going to come out there and lay it all out. And Mota has been finished in all 5 of his pro losses, and he was finished on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil. So it seems like the perfect opponent to get a finish. So I think Ogden is a decent fighter in a good matchup.
He's saying all the right things, and we would love to hear that as opposed to the opposite. So that's good news for Ogden. Next, we'll count Lucia Pudilova as a good fighter, bad fighter criteria because this is her second stint in the UFC. She only has 2 fights since she rejoined the organization. So 2 more fighters in the same matchup. We have Pudilova versus Eileen Perez. Are either of these fighters good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup for either?
Yeah, I know Eileen Perez is coming off like the crazy performance, but that was like the best possible matchup she could ever ask for. She was like facing someone that just had spine surgery, hadn't fought in 3 years, and seemed retired and had no interest in fighting. I mean, it was like literally the best matchup she could ever ask for. And all of her matchups really have been the best matchup she could ask for because they've all been against terrible opponents. So I still think Perez is a bad fighter, but she's good for DFS when she gets the right matchup. But I think Pudilova, while she struggled to defend takedowns in her first stint with the UFC, and while she hasn't faced a grappler yet in her second stint, she seems like she's improved her grappling. She's always been a good striker. So I think she's becoming a decent fighter, even though she used to be just a one-dimensional striker. So I think now that she's rounded out her game, I think we can call Pudilova not a great fighter, but a pretty decent fighter. And I think when you're fighting a low-level opponent like Perez, even though Perez is going to be looking to take her down, so stylistically it might look like a bad matchup. The fact that Perez is so low level, I think it's a decent matchup for Pudilova. And anyone that looked on Instagram, Perez like went to the hospital after weigh-ins and was like on an IV. She said she's still good and the fight's gonna happen, but I would say that adds some additional volatility to the mix. And while Pudilova has gone the distance, like 13 of her last 15 fights, I don't think it's crazy that she could finish Perez, either knock her out or some sort of submission with Perez. Perez is just so reckless and wild. I mean, any fight that Perez is in, we're going to be targeting both sides.
Absolutely, for sure, 100%. All right, next we have Jeka Seregi, who is making his second fight in the UFC. I guess, is it really his second fight? I don't know. Either way, he has 1 fight on UFC stats. It was that road to UFC competition. And he's up against Lucas Alexander, who only has 2 fights himself. So good fighter, bad fighter for both these guys. Good matchup, bad matchup.
Yeah, I think Lucas Alexander is good. He just doesn't have any grappling. So anytime he faces like a wrestler or grappler, gets taken down and often submitted. But he's like a really good striker. He did miss weight by 2 pounds, so we'll see how that affects him. And then Jack Sergey, I just tried to combine that name into one. He's kind of similar, like he'll grab a little bit, but he's pretty much a one-dimensional striker too. Like the first Indonesian fighter, he came from. Like, what's the point of having the road to UFC tournament if you lose and you still get in the
All
UFC?
right, dude. I
But
was
whatever.
wondering the same thing. I wasn't sure how that worked, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like the Ultimate Fighter now. Like both guys in the finals end up in the UFC, and if you don't make it to the finals, then sometimes you still end up in the UFC.
Sure.
Like, um, but yeah, they're kind of mirror images of each other, so it's a good matchup. I would say for both guys because they're both going to struggle when they face grapplers, but they want to face strikers. But Alexander is so tough, man. I don't think it's be a great matchup for Jekka. Um, but it's going to be a fun striking battle, and I would say, Alexander's good. Jekka at this point is still bad, and the fact that it's a striking battle is a good matchup for both of them.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Next, we have Mick Parkin, who is up against the senior citizen beating Kyle Machado. Parkin just one fight in the UFC, fought to a decision against Jamal Pogues. Is he good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup against Machado?
Yeah, I think Parkin is pretty decent. He's Tom Aspinall's training partner, and this guy seems like the type of guy where like he just does whatever his coaches tell him. Like if they told him to go like run through the cage fence, he would just do it. Like he's just literally like kind of like a robot that listens to the coaching. So I think in the first fight they were like, hey, like don't go to the ground with Pogues. Like he's a grappler. He's a BJJ guy. Just stand up, kick his skinny legs, jab him. You can outwork him. And like at some point in that fight, if he kind of thought for himself, I think he could have finished the fight. But he was like, I'm just doing the game plan. I'm just doing the game plan. He did the game plan for 15 minutes. He won the fight. He's like, I did it. I won. I mean, he's an underdog in that fight, and he won 30-27 executing the game plan. So he'll do whatever the coaches tell him. He wrestled all the time on the regional scene, but I kind of think they're going to tell him to strike again here. I don't know that for sure, but the fact that Machado's a BJJ guy, it seems like we might have to wait one more fight to get the Parkin wrestling that we've been hoping to see since before he made his debut. I could be wrong. Maybe we see it some here, but I sort of think we're going to have to wait one more time. But long way of saying that he seems pretty well rounded. He has wrestling. He showed striking. He showed the ability to go 15 minutes in that last fight with no cardio issues. And he trains with Tom Aspinall. I think that he's like an up and coming. He's a young heavyweight. He's only 28 years old, which is like a baby at heavyweight. And I think that he's a developing guy that is going to be pretty decent because he's well rounded. And if you can wrestle at heavyweight, you're basically automatically a good heavyweight. You can wrestle and strike. So I'm going to call him a good fighter. And I think Machado is not very good. He's a debuting guy. So I think it's a good matchup to some extent to win. But I think it's not the best DFS matchup because I think we could see another safe-ish game plan from Parkin where he doesn't really use his wrestling. But I'm really hoping the third fight we get an opponent for Parkin where he gets someone that doesn't wrestle and he just like unloads in the wrestling and no one sees it coming except for the people listening to this.
I was just gonna say, right? Obviously, we want to get some wins under our belt before the end of the tax year, but it couldn't be more perfect if he puts up another like 75 points here, and then his next fight he's 9,100, and his average points scored is 72.5, right?
Yep.
I mean, right,
Yep.
pure fan fiction here, but that is a spot we would love to see in the right matchup. But just keep that in the back of your mind. If you're watching this, just store that in the back of your mind for the next time Mick Parkin fights. All right. Next we have Christian Leroy Duncan CLD. Got the short notice change for his opponent as well. Dennis Tululin steps in on short notice. Duncan has now ballooned to a minus 500 favorite. Is he good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup against Tululin?
Yeah, I'm still gonna call him kind of bad. He's kind of a low volume, one dimensional striker. He's got okay power, but like he's not well rounded enough, and he hasn't shown that he's a good enough striker to only be a striker, and he's got like no grappling. So, I mean, maybe he's a developing guy, still 28, still young, could get better, but he's not great. He's not great in DFS. I don't think he's great in real life just because he's so one dimensional and he doesn't throw enough volume. It's all like roundhouses and spinning attacks and like just crazy approaches. He needs, I don't know, he's an English guy. Maybe he needs to go train with Mick Parkin a little bit, but I'm not sold on CLD quite yet. But it is a good matchup. It's a good matchup because he's there to bang, man. Tululin has no grappling, which I don't really think Duncan's going to be able to capitalize on. But Tulin's also pretty hittable on the feet. He averages the most significant strikes absorbed on the slate at 5.83 per minute, coming in on short notice. He's been finished a bunch. I mean, generally, well, the last 5 times he's been finished has been on the mat, which I don't really think Duncan's going to do. You never know. I mean, Duncan will occasionally attempt to take down, occasionally land one when he was with Cage Warriors, and he couldn't get Armin Petrosian down, so I'm not really confident that he can get anyone down. Armin Petrosian came into that matchup with a 25% takedown defense, so you can't take him down, then you might have a tougher time here. But the fact that Tallulah will just stand there and bang with you, I could definitely see Duncan just connecting on like a roundhouse and getting a first round knockout, especially considering Tallulah came in on a few days' notice. He's probably just entirely focused on cutting weight. Could come in with a suspect chin or suspect. He already has suspect cardio, but even worse cardio. So I still think Duncan probably gets a knockout, but kind of a bad fighter, good matchup situation.
All right, and next we have two more fighters. I mean, we have tons of fighters on this card with less than
The
4
whole
fights.
card.
Yeah, the entire card basically. Chad and Helliger and Jose Johnson. Johnson, if my memory serves correctly, is not the best at defending takedowns and is the best at getting controlled. Not sure, and Helliger is the guy to take advantage of that, right? So, talking about this matchup, are they good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup for either?
Yeah, Johnson, one of 3 people to ever lose by twister submission in the UFC. I mean, he took that fight on short notice against Damon Blackshear. Really, I mean, that was just a setup for a murder spot. Can't blame him too much, but yeah, I mean, both these guys are terrible on the mat. Even though Henniger is like a BJJ black belt now, he's been like all 5 of his early losses were by submission. He's coming off a decision loss where he almost got knocked out. But these guys, while they look completely opposite of each other, one's a tiny white dude from Canada. The other one's like a 6 foot, 135-pound black guy. Like they're exact opposites visually, but they're like a mirror image of each other stylistically. They're both one-dimensional strikers. They both struggle with being controlled. They both have terrible wrestling. So it's like, is one of them going to be able to capitalize on the terrible defensive wrestling of the other one? Maybe. More likely, it'll be a striking battle. And in that sense, like, give me the 6 foot guy with a 71-inch reach that's 28 years old over the 36-year-old 5'6" guy from Canada with a 64-inch reach coming off a shoulder injury and like a year-long layoff. I mean, is that overly simplified here? But it seems like a better matchup for Jose Johnson. And it seems like, a good stylistic matchup for both guys just because they're not going against grapplers per se. So both guys bad fighters in a good matchup.
Yeah, I don't think that's simplified. I think that's a great 30-minute video boiled down analysis of the fight. And then the last one on the we have 2 more. Nope, there's tons. All right, we got Uros Medic. We already talked about his opponent, Oral By. Medic, is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup?
He's an okay striker, no grappling. He had been at 155, came up to 170, almost got finished in the first round of his last fight. Semmelsberger came back, got a 3rd-round finish of his own at elevation. Maybe that was a factor. I don't know. He's a one-dimensional knockout guy, Medic. So seems like a bad matchup. He's facing a wrestler. So I would say Medic is a bad fighter and a bad matchup. But Orlby did come in on short notice, so that's kind of the wild card.
The rare $8,900 underdog on DraftKings. Next, we have Nick Aguirre, who you've already said how fraudulent you think his opponent is, but is Aguirre the guy that can capitalize on it?
Man, I think he can. It is very rare to see me pick a plus 500 underdog. Like, I can't even remember the last one I picked. But,
like outright, like you like him for DFS, but like on MMADFS.com to your Patreons, your members, you literally are picking Aguirre to win this fight.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I did that. And I could look foolish if he can't get the fight to the ground. I'm gonna look like an idiot. But Nick Aguirre is a decent grappler. He trains in a good room with Bilal Muhammad, Saidikov, Kakramanov, Juliana Pena, Carlos Hernandez. He's in Chicago at the VFS Academy. He's got a bunch of good partners. He was in the worst possible situation for his debut, and everyone thinks he sucks because he came in on short notice, up a weight class, in a terrible stylistic matchup against another wrestler. And he had no chance. He was set up to fail in that spot. Like, I bet against him in that spot. I was like, this guy has no chance against Dan Argueta. And he actually did take Argueta's back in the first round, to his credit, which is what Nick does, is he gets people down early and he finishes them early on the mat. Like, that's his whole game. He's a jiu-jitsu guy. He hasn't shown anything on the feet. This is a very, black and white matchup where if he gets the fight down, he's going to have a major advantage. And if he doesn't, then he's going to look terrible on the feet. And, I tend to take the grapplers over the strikers in these situations where both guys are very one dimensional. Just because, if you can dictate where the fight takes place, it's much easier to win. And if you're a striker, it's much harder to dictate where the fight takes place if the other guy's actively trying to take you down. So give me the grappler here, and yeah, I mean, I think the odds are absolutely insane. I got Aguirre at plus 550. I mean, I think it's come down a little bit now. It's MGM has it at plus 500 now, but yeah, I mean, this fight, either guy I think has the potential to look like negative 500. So give me the guy that's plus 500 in that situation.
I like that. And I mean, if you just look just situationally, remove the names, remove everything else. You look at the guy who fought his short notice debut up a weight class, as you said, lost predictably, and now is in his second fight versus a newcomer from a small gym. You can't really ask for a better matchup in situationally. And then you look at the odds and you look at the DFS ownership. I mean, Aguirre's gonna be what, under 5% in DFS, probably under 10 at least.
Yeah, we have him at like 6% right now.
This is how we lose money, boys. All right, strap in for this fight on Saturday, and I think that's finally it. All right, we got enough. All right, we got all the fighters.
Michael Morales.
Nope, just kidding. He has 3 fights. Is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup against Jake Matthews?
Oh man. I think Michael Morales is like decent offensively, but pretty bad defensively. He's got like the hands down, chin up approach where he's just asking to get knocked out sooner rather than later. So like he's one of these guys where he's good at offense and he's bad at defense. And when he faces someone that can eventually capitalize on that, he's going to get knocked out. Whether that's Jake Matthews, I think it could be. I don't know if it necessarily is, but I think Jake Matthews has shown the power recently to knock people out. So I think it's sort of a kind of like an in-between fighter and an in-between matchup. But I don't want to call Morales terrible because he is an interesting prospect, but he really needs to improve his striking defense. So until he fixes his striking defense and until he shows more wrestling in the UFC, which he was like the Ecuadorian like wrestling champion or something, but he never used it in the UFC. So as long as he's a one-dimensional striker with bad striking defense, I think we have to call him bad. And Matthews is a vet, man. He can grapple. He doesn't really like to. He's got the Brendan Allen thing going where he'd rather strike than grapple, even though he has decent grappling. He's like a black belt. So I think it's a bad matchup for Morales. And yeah, apparently I'm picking a bunch of underdogs in this card because I think Matthews could upset this one too.
Whew. We are in for a treat. Hopefully, it's not 14-0 in the favorite side, but I think I agree with you. We will see some upsets on this slate, and we've already been going for 42 minutes. So we're going to close out the show here quickly with our Prize Picks play, Fight to Target, Stream Parlay of the Week. Before we do that, make sure you subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. As you see, if you're watching this on replay, more than likely, sometimes we do these late at night. Sometimes we do these on Saturdays. Subscribing is the best way to get notified when we're live or when the video is uploaded if it's a pre-recorded video. So make sure you subscribe. It's free to do so here on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up to show your support, show that you like this type of content. And any questions, we're still doing it live for the next 4 or 5 minutes, so throw it in the chat. But more than likely, if you have questions, you can comment on the video, and not sure we'll get back to you. Discord is the best way to reach out to us. All right, Jake. So Prize Picks play of the week. I think all 3 swept in the plug last week, if I'm not mistaken. I know you had a big week on Prize Picks. So who's your favorite Prize Picks play this week?
Yeah, hit the top 4 Prize Picks plays I gave out.
Nice.
3 were in the plug. Top 4 on Patreon. So yeah, it was a good week. I really like Chase Hooper over 80.5 points there, man. I think Chase Hooper is making major improvements, and I think Jordan Levitt's a fraud. So Chase Hooper, I think, soars past 80.5 as long as he doesn't randomly get finished, which I don't really see happening.
I mean, you're basically saying, does Chase Hooper win this fight at 80.5, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah, pretty much. He's negative 200 favorite right now.
Yeah, gotta like that line. All right. I'm baffled at that line. That doesn't make a ton of sense, given the money line. All right, fight to target in DFS. Doesn't sound like you like Levitt, so we're not going to pick that fight. But which fight do you think, Jake, whoever wins is likely to score extremely well in DFS?
Yeah, this one's sort of obvious, but I think it's the one you have to go to. It's the Jonathan Pierce, Joe Anderson Brito fight. I think it's either going to be a Brito first round finish or Pierce is going to finish him late in the fight with ground and pound.
Well, that's a great transition, Jake, because our stream parlay of the week, my side of the parlay, which for those who don't know, I pick a prop or money line or total. Jake picks one. We parlay it together. We try to buy a car with it after we win. Mine is going to be Pierce round 2 or round 3 win. I think it's over on FanDuel. I mean, this is basically we have some auto bets obviously in UFC when we get certain opponents, certain guys fighting, and with Brito's gas tank, with Pierce's style, I think this is the perfect auto bet round 2, round 3 for Jonathan Pierce. So I will take that as my side of the stream parlay.
Yeah, round 2 or round 3 KO
Oh,
specifically, right?
KO, right? Sorry, yep, exactly, KO.
Yeah, that's plus 750. Yeah, I'm gonna pair it with a decent long shot too. Just let's go for the Lambo. I'm gonna go Nick Aguirre money line. I got a 550 earlier. It's now 520 on FanDuel, but I still think that it's way too wide. So if we pair those together, it's plus 5170. So not too bad.
All right, one final piece of advice: we are high on Aguirre. The model may not like him, but you got to look at the situations of the stats that's being fed into the model. And no matter how much we adjust for his initial debut, it's really tough to get him into a favorable OF index when he had 13 strikes in his debut and now is a plus 500 underdog. But understand, he is a plus 500 underdog and he's 6% in DraftKings projected ownership. You don't have to go crazy to take advantage if Jake is indeed right about Aguirre. Jake, I gotta say, just in general, I love the call, love the confidence, and that alone should let people know that if you're new here, right, you may not understand. If you've been here for a while, you know that we're not ones to play it safe. We're not ones to play the chalk necessarily. I didn't win 4 solo GPPs by playing the chalk, but it goes to show that we do the research and we're willing to go out there and stick our necks out there for takes and bets and picks and DFS plays that we truly believe are the best for our viewers and members.
Absolutely, man.
All right, guys, that'll do it. Check out Jake's work, MMADFS.com. The sheet right up for every single fight betting in DFS, early bets in the week, other great DFS and betting tools. So check out Jake's site, MMADFS.com. OccupyFantasy.com is where Jake writes our daily plug with top plays, lineup construction tips, more best bets and prize picks plays. Our Occupy model ranks every fighter, FanDuel, and DraftKings with projected ownership. And our lineup builder allows you to build up to 300 lineups using the same rules I use to win UFC GPP. So for Jake, at DFS_MMA on Twitter, I'm at Brian Jester FF. From MMA DFS and Occupy Fantasy, thank you for listening and good luck at UFC Vegas 82.